So first of all, a quick introduction to everyone. My name is Mai. I am the Southeast Asia lead at Climate Tracker. And apologies for the background. I am in a kid-friendly zone, but it's very nice to have everyone here. So I'm gonna go ahead and first introduce Ari. Ari is our Media Research Fellow from Indonesia. Ari, do you wanna quickly introduce yourself to everyone?
Yes. Hello, everybody. I'm Ari Ulandari from Indonesia.
Okay, thanks, Ari. And yeah, we can hear you, Ari. If possible, could you turn on your video?
Yeah.
All right, and then next is...
I don't think so because...
Okay, if not, that's fine. Don't worry about it. And then next is Cherika. Cherika is our other media research fellow in Indonesia, and she looked at a specific case study in her country. And let Cherika speak for herself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cherika. Yeah, I'm glad to be here and join today's webinar to meet all of you.
All right, so I will get started with the presentation then. A little bit before we start, actually. So the flow of today's event, we're going to start with a presentation where I will be talking about our Media Research Fellowship, as well as presenting the results that Ari and Cherika found during their research. And then we will have a question and answer section where you can ask Ari and Cherika any questions you have. You can ask them in Bahasa or English, and our researcher can answer in both. And also, I would recommend writing down your questions in the chat box as we're going through the presentation, because I will be prioritizing questions that are written in the chat box first. I just wrote in the chat box to make sure everyone can see it, but yes, if you click on the chat box button at the end of the call, you'll see that I just wrote, please feel free to type questions here, and hope everyone will do that during the call. All right, now I am going to start sharing my screen. Okay, can everyone give me a nod if you can see the screen well? Cherika, can you see the screen? Okay, awesome. All right, so welcome everyone to this webinar. This webinar is part of our Southeast Asia Research Fellowship, which is a 5-country collaborative analysis on how the energy future is being told and what we can do to transform the narrative. So before I begin to explain the project, a little bit about Climate Tracker and Stanley Center, which are the 2 organizations that collaborate on this project. So Climate Tracker is a network of environmental journalists. As a couple of you will know already, our mission is to support, incentivize, and train young journalists around the world to write great climate stories. And since 2015, we have delivered trainings, media campaigns, and media research, such as this one, especially surrounding UN climate negotiations. And right now we have more than 15,000 members, and it's one of the biggest network of young climate journalists. So about the Stanley Center for Peace and Security partners with people, organizations, and the greater global community to drive policy progress in 3 issue areas, and one of them is climate change. The center was created in 1956 and maintains its independence while developing forums for diverse perspectives and ideas, such as this one. And to learn more about recent publications and upcoming events, you can go to the Stanley Center's website. All right, so about our media research program in Southeast Asia, like I said before, we are engaging researchers across 5 different countries. Of course, Indonesia is one of them. We have Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, and Vietnam as well. These are the countries you'll know commonly referred to as the 5 Tiger Cups of Asia, or the new developing countries in Southeast Asia. And across these 5 countries, we have 10 researchers. For each country, there's researchers. One main researcher, such as Ari for Indonesia, who worked with us for 3 months to look at the stage of energy reporting in general. And then we also have a case study researcher, such as Cherika for Indonesia. And she will explain her case study later on. And all our researchers have strong journalism background and experience in environmental reporting. And before the start of the program, they underwent a 2-week intensive training course on media research. And the methods that we employed for this analysis include content analysis, framing analysis, as well as interviews with reporters and editors. So as you already know, our key research question is, how are the most influential news outlets talking about coal, renewable, and the energy transition, and why? So some of the goals that we reached in Indonesia, Ari has examined 350 articles. 175 of them are about coal, 175 are about renewable energy. Meanwhile, Cherika has examined 40 articles for her case study, and the case study focuses on how the recent omnibus and mining law has been covered in the media. In total, Ari and Cherika interviewed 19 media practitioners, both editors and reporters, and their research spans 18 months from January 2019 to August 2020. I see that Neil has typed some comments in the chat box, so really hope that everyone else would do that as well and let us know what questions you might have. So I'm ready to cover our research process. I'm going to skip through the slide and let Ari take over to present her key findings.
Okay, thank you so much, Mai. Okay, I need your help if I say next slide. Please click the next slide.
Okay. Yeah, this slide is just
so. Yes. Okay. So in this occasion, I just will give a short presentation. So I hope everybody just has read the complete report that we have sent previously to you all. So now let's start by discussing the common articles frames. So I classified all the articles, sampled articles into 6 frames, and on the report I just discussed 3 most common frames. So on the picture, the dark blue color is for coal and purple color for RE or renewable energy. So for coal, the most common frames was the economics. It takes 40%. So coal was framed as indispensable for economic development by governments and business sources. And the second most common frame on the coal stories was human impacts. It took 19%. So coal was blamed for causing human impacts globally. And the last one, for coal, I discussed moral value. It took 14%. And emission reduction was framed as a responsibility towards international community. So for RE, the most common frames I found was moral value. It took 6%. So RE development was framed as a moral imperative due to environmental and security concerns. And the second most common for RE stories was the economy, 40%. RE was framed as good for economy. So sometimes it says that it will attract foreign investment, it can provide clean jobs, and also it will add value to agriculture production. So I'm talking about biofuel B20 to B100 program in Indonesia. And the last one, the most common frame for RE is attribution of responsibility. It took 14% of the entire sample. RE policies require further support from governments and the public. The next, please. Yeah, so here So we can see that the media in Indonesia gave positive light for coal. So like more than half of the sample articles. It's around 67.1%, but of course, even though it's like dominates the positive light, but they still discuss the negativity of the coal. It's around, I think it's big enough, 32.9%. Yes, next. Yeah, so news articles in Indonesia frame call positively far more than any other Southeast Asia country included in this regional study. Environmental concerns regularly invalidated. So we concerned, they didn't clearly mention about environmental concerns. That's what we mean here. And when specific mining activities in certain areas are presented as harmful or risky, their legality is questioned rather than the effects of mining itself. So if it's legal, so no issue, you know. So in the sample articles, this case appeared because there was a disaster, and media found that actually those coal mining were illegal. So that's why the media didn't really question about the real impact of the mining itself, but about the legality of this thing. And then financial ties may have influenced the choice of coal frame. In our sample of 7 outlets, 3 outlets, Okezon, Indonesia, and Batik are owned by corporation with coal mining interests. Okezon and the Indonesia together published 62.5% of the articles, highlighting the positive economic contribution of the coal industry. Next, please. As I pass it on to my colleague, Cherika.
Yeah. Okay, so I am specifically looking at omnibus law and coal and mineral law in this research. So just to give a bit of context, both of these laws are highly controversial. Because of various reasons. It's also quite political. So both of these laws have been enacted, have been passed. And for the coal law, it was passed in June, whereas for omnibus law was actually passed in October. And it was quite big on the news, and it created some chaos as well in the country. But what my research scope was only until July. So yeah, just to give a bit of context about how the issue evolved from July 2019 to July 2020. And from the articles I analyzed, there are at least 5 framing being used in the articles. First is that the omnibus law and coal law were both merely benefiting corporations. Some of the articles mention specifically 7 corporates that will be benefited from these laws. And secondly, there were a lot of nuance and messaging in the articles that says these laws, the processes were not following the right procedure, in a way that it's also related to the third framing, which states that the process of this law making or policy making was very closed and not transparent, and did not involve civil societies in general. And then fourth, it's also mentioned in a number of articles saying that the government deliberately using the COVID-19 timing to pass this law so that public will not really pay attention to it, but the result is the opposite. And lastly, there was also some discussions, particularly about omnibus law, which is seen as an effort to move the authority from the regional government back to the central government, which is actually a setback to what the Indonesian government has been working on this past decade, which is to decentralize. But now it seems like there's an effort to do the other way around. So that was the result of the framing analysis I did.
Thank you, Cherika.
And back to Ari.
Okay, thank you, Cherika and Mike. I continue the rest of the presentation. So as you can see on the picture, it's about a breakdown of topics covered, renewable energy. So 44.9% the stories, sample stories just mentioned renewable as a general concept. So the stories didn't mention specifically about technology. So, but the rest, of course, there was some stories talk about solar, that's 20.1%, and biofuel 17.2%, and the rest, the bluish colors, it appears just big hydro, wind, small hydropower, but also about biogas, geothermal, nuclear, and gas itself. Next, please. And it's maybe the interesting thing for me, at least. It's like for media in Indonesia, they give a really for renewable energy. So as you can see here, 88.6%. The stories gave positive light. The negativity, it's only 1.4%, and it's only about 2 articles. I just got 2 articles talk about negativity of renewable energy. First, it's a nuclear case in Japan, so it's like wider story. So it's not it didn't talk about domestic issue. And the second one, it's a B20. So B20 is a program to mix the fuel with the biodiesel, 20% composition and complaint. But in the article, there was a clarification from the government, because maybe the drivers haven't known how to use the B20 properly. But of course, I still classified it as a negative light, because of course, if we read something like this, we will think, oh, maybe B20 is not good. But it's really small. It's only 1.4%. I would say, like, of all media in Indonesia support renewable energy. Next. And so I already mentioned about this, like 45% of renewable energy stories discuss the concept in general terms. And Indonesia recent rapid, like I also already mentioned about the biodiesel. And solar and wind still a nascent phase of development, and journalists consider this technology hard to approach. It's also hard to approach because the sources were limited, because based on the interviews, they said that, of course, as journalists, what they do, like collect the information, and they need experts out of the government to talk more about this. So the alternative options, either they have to talk to scientists, university staff, or professor maybe, about this, and those people talk technically. So not all journalists, even though they energy journalists, understand, even though they understand, the hard thing is how to read and how to write the story as simple as possible so a common reader can read it enjoyable. Uh, that's the problem. Technology hard approach. Next.
Okay, so thank you, Ari and Cherika, for your presentation. At the moment, I already have one question from Arpan from Global Voices. So wondering if Arpan would like to state his own question, or I can read it from the comment section. Arpan, hello? Okay, I think I'm gonna state his question. So I think his question for Ari and Cherika is, why did our media monitoring, I guess, look at analysis in general, but did not try to locate or connect between the specific location of mining companies with the associated with the media. For example, the news about coal on OK Zone is related to the MNC group mining in Borneo, and you know, what is the fact of environmental damage due to the group's mining in Borneo versus what is the actual coverage? I think that's what he was trying to ask. So Ari or Cherika, do you want to answer that question? Hello? Ari, since you looked at OK Zone, I'm wondering if you can give an answer to this.
Yes, I'm still thinking about this. It is a very, very good question. To be honest, it's hard for me to answer this question, you know.
Yeah, I mean, within the framework of our... Go ahead, Ari.
Yeah, to do this, you know, we need more than, especially currently, even though we have all the resources, I don't think it's easy. It's not only my own opinion, but also as based on the interview I conducted with a senior energy journalist. They really want to produce good articles about energy, but to trace the location of the mining companies, you know, it's not easy, because it's not easy to know all the detail about them. Even the journalists themselves told me, yeah, they invite them to attend, for example, like ceremonial things or something easy, let's say. But to dive deeper into their activities, it's not easy. And I think that's the answer.
Yeah.
I know that it's not a good answer, but that's as I can.
No, to elaborate upon that, Arpan, the timeline of our research did not allow for the researchers to do a lot of field work. Yeah, in fact, most of the work that we did was more, you know, analysis and interviewing people, because, you know, if you're gonna choose a list of mining locations and then actually try to do field work, it would take a lot more time than what we were allowed, and also within the context of COVID-19, because if we do it for Indonesia, we're going to have to do it for other countries in our study as well, and that would have been quite hard to coordinate given the changing circumstance of restrictions on travel in the different places. So within the scale of this project, we were only able to do online analysis rather than compare it with the reality on the ground. But certainly, I think that's a very interesting, like, additional research question. And perhaps, you know, if anyone who reads the report that we produce and want to do a further comparison of the coverage versus the reality in these mines, that would certainly, I'd be very interested in reading that more detailed coverage as well. Yeah. I hope that answer satisfies your question, Arpan. Okay, that's the only question I have right now in the chat box. Wondering if anyone else has any questions for the researchers at this moment? Well, if not, I have a couple of questions that I can ask them right now, so we can maybe wait for other people to come up with more questions. Since Ari has been talking, I want to ask Cherika. You know, Cherika, did anything that you find during your case study of the mining and omnibus laws, did any of it surprise you? And I guess after doing that analysis, and now we know the results that both of these laws have been passed, like, what are your feelings about that as well?
Yeah, it's quite surprising because well, to say it, the bad publication about these laws have been ongoing since May, I think, around May and June, the peak, and yet the government still passed them both anyways. It's quite surprising. I thought they would be more careful and they would take more time to review it before passing them, but they did it anyways. So even up until today, it's still ongoing, all these discussions publicly in media as well as in social media. But yeah, so we'll see if there's going to be an effort to amend this or not, first of all. But if not, the way the law will work is that there will still need to be like regulation, like implementing regulation in order to enforce it. And this will also take another process, I think. So it's not going to be immediately enforced, but it will still take some time until it's finally implemented.
Yeah, and were you surprised at the finding that, you know, a lot of the criticism of these laws focused on the process by which they were passed rather than the environmental impact of these laws themselves?
Yeah, sadly, a lot of news that I analyzed, I look at three: Compass, Tempo, and Business. They are all very much focused on the political aspect instead of the environmental aspects, which I was expecting there will be more coverage on that. But unfortunately not. And for the omnibus law, it's quite tricky because it also covers other things like labor law, investment, and so on. So there was very limited discussion about the environmental impacts of this.
Yeah.
Although I think it's quite a significant change what they're proposing.
Yeah.
But,
and in terms of the journalists that they interview, what were their outstanding sort of perspective on, you know, what could potentially boost more environmental reporting, or what are some of the challenges that they faced? And this is a question for Cherika and Ari as well.
For the journalists I interviewed, they're all mainly like senior journalists. Mm-hmm. But I find that for journalists that are stationed in certain ministry, for example, Ministry of Energy, they don't really coordinate with the other journalists who are stationed, for example, in Ministry of Forestry or Economy. So the reporting is just focused on one side of the story, but not being elaborated with other elements like environmental or other things. So it's yeah, they said that there's always a regular editorial meeting. But for me personally, as an outsider, as a researcher, I see that they don't really coordinate well, and they don't, share before publishing a story.
And this was within one newsroom, right? You didn't even see a lot of collaboration between the different desks of
Yeah.
Yeah. How about you, Ari? Did you find the same thing when you were interviewing journalists, or what are the outstanding challenges that they mentioned?
What do you mean by outstanding challenges?
Or what are the challenges that
to get
the challenges to energy and environmental reporting that you found when talking to your
yeah. As a, so they mentioned about it because I specifically asked them about this. So they talk about data. For example, I will quote a statement from Manga Bay, Indonesia journalists. They had great views, I guess, because they concerned about environment, of course. So, for example, one of them mentioned about how a journalist, they didn't mention the name of the journalist. This journalist produced a good investigation report. And he bought documents from the Ministry of Indonesia. So he could trace all the existing information about all the companies. So it's related to a previous question. So they highlight that, look at this report. We need a lot of efforts to produce a high quality report because it's not easy. It's their words. Everything is not for free in Indonesia. So if you need data, you have to buy it. And if you have enough funds, so maybe you can create a good report and something like this. So first, data. So in my opinion, if we can provide database for the journalists, maybe it will encourage them to produce more good energy coverage. Because, for example, even the most business side outlets in this research, the editor said, it's not easy to get the source person, especially business companies, business representatives. Because when we are talking about business representatives, maybe in Indonesia, it's like state-owned companies, like PLN, Pertamina, PNG, something like this. So, because it's not easy, so what journalists can write if they don't have data? So data first. Data. I think all the journalists I interviewed, they said that the most challenging things in energy reporting is data. And the second one about the understanding, because all of them confess that energy reporting is not easy. In the beginning, of course, when they already as senior journalists, energy journalists, maybe they get used of all the terms, units of the energy. So it's not easy. Even one of them, she's been in energy reporting for 2 or 3 years. But whenever she wants to write about gas, because it's not something common in Indonesia, she needs to Google first, like what is the unit, what's the unit. Right. So it's the second one, I think. Yeah. First, data. Second one, understanding. And maybe the third one, funding, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's a very concrete answer. Data is something that Cherika found to be an issue with the journalists that she talked to as well, right, Cherika? Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, so I spoke with our journalist from Tempo, Ibu Retno. She was telling me that actually data are available, but sources, she said that for her magazine, she has to invest a lot of time to approach sources personally, because it's different when you are a journalist that are stationed in a ministry. Like almost every day you can meet people who are working there and they will give a statement for a doorstep interview and all that. But for example, like a CEO of a coal company, that you really need to invest in building personal relationship in order for them to speak up to you, be it on the record or off the record, right? And yeah, for business people, they tend to be more careful about their statements, because anything they say can, it has an impact, especially if it's like big company like coal or mining company. And they are, of course, being very careful because of the commercially sensitive commodity like coal and fossil fuel. Yeah, it's only on very special occasion that they will speak up. But if you are building like good relationships with them, it's possible that you will get a lot of good insights. But yeah, for junior journalists, I think they will find it difficult, because if they are new in the field, they will still have to find ways to navigate the sources.
Yeah, I think that's some very interesting insight, Cherika, because actually from Ari's research, this is not in the presentation, but you will see if you read the full report that more than 80%, I think, Ari, of the sources that you found are source, or more than 80% of the articles on coal quote from business and government sources. So in fact, we do sort of see an overrepresentation of these perspectives in the media, but then when you talk to journalists, they still say that it's difficult to actually try and get these sources to answer the real questions that they have, because we see that when business is quoted, it's usually, a general statement or maybe a press release or press conference. It's usually from a very PR standpoint, rather than the journalists being able to ask and present quotes about in-depth issues. And the same thing, I think, is true for the different government ministries as well.
Yeah, they're being diplomatic.
Yeah, they're being very diplomatic. So maybe one of the steps that we can think about for helping journalists gain more perspectives and in-depth quotes for their analysis and articles would be, some kind of association that can approach and connect these sources, especially for junior journalists and people who are freelancers, for example. Yeah, so I have a question from Devin from the Stanley Center. So Devin asked that with coal being such a large part of Indonesia's energy mix, it makes sense that there's more coal coverage and there are pressures to frame coal more positively. Like Ari already said, in fact, Indonesia stands out among the 5 countries that we studied. None of them has positive coal coverage taking more than 50% of the total coal article sample, but for Indonesia it's more than 60%, so that's quite a big difference. But then Devin's question is, did you find it surprising that renewable stories were also overwhelmingly framed positively? And this might suggest that journalists' education and training would need to focus on improving coal coverage and diversifying coal coverage rather than targeting the training on renewable energy coverage. Yeah, I wonder if Cherika and Ari agree with this view or this question. Ari, do you want to go first? since you studied both renewable?
Okay. Yeah, first of all, my answer is yes. I do agree with this idea because I, to be honest, I'm also surprised about this because I didn't know if the other like the other pillar reports say that like the stories, the sample stories gave not more than 50% for positive light. So if it's because I could feel that all the journalists, all the stories support renewable energy. So maybe we should pay more attention to the coal because never ever I ever like I attended seminars or I talked to my friends about coal issue. We can like even though we really want to replace it with renewable energy, but our economy it's the narrative, and I think I get influenced by this narrative, and our Indonesian economy, so many sectors, so many factors. Like recently in Java, especially in Jakarta, there was a blackout only for 3 days actually, but Jakarta never experienced blackout. So like electricity turned off for 3 days, and everything like not chaos, but a big issue. So it's like a really simple example how we depend a lot to coal. And so maybe because if we can change the mindset, like how to put it and shape the narratives, just like other countries, I think it's a good idea because so far, me personally, to be honest, I also see like that because in the economic side, so point of view, like maybe it's also the considerations of our Indonesian government, how we can handle it. But of course, I believe that there is a better way to for the energy transition narratives in Indonesia. But what's happening right now, it's the narrative. That's why all the media, all the journalists, not even it's from commercial outlets, from independent outlets, because we realize what happens. That's why maybe so far we can't see other narratives. But if like new or fresh ideas come and explain more and can convince to change slowly the narratives, it's gonna be a good idea because we already have basis. All the journalists do agree with the renewable energy narratives, but also still see economy as a dispensable economy for development.
Yeah, thank you for that perspective, Ari. Yeah, how about you, Cherika? Do you agree with what Ari shared, or do you have anything to add for that question as well?
Yeah, I think it's great actually to, if we could give a training, let's say, to journalists on coal, but to kind of diversify the perspectives, not only looking at the story from business or law lens, but also from other elements. I think that would be great, because all this time the story has always been about those topics, like either economy or politics. And also regarding the sources, I think there are coal and renewable celebrity that's being mentioned in like so many articles. It's always the same people. And when I ask the journalists, they also agree, yeah, well, it's the circle is small and it's always the same people that we interview. I don't know how to, but I think it's important to kind of connect the journalists with new sources. Because, for example, in renewables, there are a lot of new players in the field, like renewable startups, for example. They also have an interesting view, I would say. And also for NGOs, it's always the same NGOs again.
Right.
So if there's an effort to widen their network, not just the same old NGOs, but trying to outreach to new sources, that would be great, I think. And it will make the reporting richer in terms of perspectives.
Yeah, I think community NGOs and community leaders should definitely be a voice that we get more representation from. Yeah, because if you're just looking at the big names, the national NGOs or the national business representatives, it's really a small circle that gets overrepresented in the media. But yeah, it does seem like in Indonesia, the coal story is one that would need a lot of effort from all sides, from stakeholders and NGOs and interested journalists in order to change the narrative, because there's so much like financial tie between the media organizations themselves and coal mining and coal power plant interests. Whereas I think renewable, it's a more positive story. But that's not to say that I think journalists would also benefit from renewable energy trainings as well, because like Ari found in her research that a lot of the renewable energy coverage, although it's very positive, it's also from the business perspective. You don't see a lot of discussion of renewable as, a long-term like energy sustainable option in terms of policy. It's still more like short-term business investment. And also nearly half of the renewable stories are about renewables in general without mentioning the specific technology. So I think more literacy about how the different technologies differ from each other would also diversify the narrative. All right, so unless we get more questions now, I don't think there are any more questions. Although I would like to read out Arpan's comment as well. I think this is in relation to the discussion we were having about lack of diversity for sources in coal articles, and how it's hard, like Ari said, to get data and quotes from people about the environmental damages. It's, the Ministry of Energy does not want to open the data because if you know where all these mining locations are and what specifically are the environmental damages, then everything will be seen in direct proportion, and there will be much fewer positive stories, presumably. And this is something that, I guess a lot of these organizations wouldn't want to have happen. But Arpan offered that he has some connections to their sources that you can try to go to get the data on mine waste residue and other issues. So thank you for writing that out, putting that out there, Arpan, and I hope journalists in this call would take advantage of that. All right. Our full report for Indonesia in both English and Bahasa will be published very soon on both Climate Tracker and Stanley Center's website. And I hope that everyone here will stay engaged with us and read the full reports when it's out. And please let us know if you have any further thoughts or comments down the line. And I'd also like to flag that we have a regional report webinar release event on November 30th. That's going to be all of the 5 countries in our studies, so hope you will join that as well. All right, have a good night, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And thank you, a special thanks for our speakers as well, of course.